Anthony Simons, he made some headlines yesterday with his comments at his exit interview because what you had said prior at the beginning of our last segment of get ready, it's going to be another rough go of it next year. What we heard Joe Cronin say yesterday, like things like this.
And often that's with additional help. I think this year there were some flaws in the roster, especially in some missing skill sets and just in general imbalance, where it made it complicated for those guys to reach their highest potential. There's skill sets we need to add, like we need more shooters. We've got to open up the floor for guys. We need more playmaking. We need more defenders. There's a lot of things we need. So we're going to continue to evaluate how do we supplement the existing group that we have, but at the same time, not ignoring we're not good enough yet. We don't have enough talent. Like, we've got to keep boosting our talent base. And, I mean, it might be our most, important thing we do this summer is keep adding to this talent base.
So in the game of basketball, they lack shooters, defenders, and playmakers.
Mm-hmm. I think it's the combination of where they existed at. Because you've got guys that defend. Tamani, Chris, Jeremy, D.A. like Tease. But Tamani, Chris, Tease, what do they not do?
Score.
They're not great shooters. And so they have to find that balance. And talking to the Blazers coming into this season, they knew they had a deficit of two things, shooting and playmaking. They 100% knew that. It was like, hey, we know where we're at, but we want to see how much of the air these guys can take up. How much are they capable of just like, and the idea of like when they're healthy, you had Time Lord out there or DA out there.
Yeah.
You had a back line that like you could cover up for a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And
you had one
not Duop Reith, who Greenlight Reith loved him. But however,
you had a guy in Ayton who anchored a finals run and another guy who was a defensive player of the year candidate. Like, that was the idea. Okay, we've got a back line that can help support this, right? You would have one of Malcolm Brogdon or Anthony Simons to help run the offense, whether it was Scoot Henderson or Shaedon Sharpe alongside them. You would have Tamani Kamara out there as a guy that could go between as a defensive player, or Matisse Thybulle. And then you had Jeremy Grant to supplant as another guy who could shoot and create. But there was always going to be a shortage of either one shooter or one playmaker on the floor.
And there was a second most in the NBA, only to the Memphis Grizzlies, who shut everybody down.
Yes, they had 36 different lineups.
The Blazers had 40 different starting lineups this year and missed 351 games due to injury.
It was insane.
Second most in the NBA.
Yeah, and that's even if you take away like the final 2 weeks,
or I should say, injury and an ice storm.
Yeah.
So
the one there.
It would have been 350 had it not been for DeAndre Ayton in the ice storm.
Just so dumb. But yeah, I mean, and again, if they're fully healthy and everything goes well, and Chauncey Billups kind of mentioned this yesterday, they're not really competing. Like, they're kind of competing, and I think the Vancouver Vortex line has a great line of this as far as my thinking. By going into next year, more losses by like 8 instead of 30. That stuff is demoralizing, and I think that's the idea. Is like, look, you're still going to
60.
You're still going to lose, but you're just in it until kind of what we saw for the last month.
And
really,
that's what I was saying. Is that the Blazers yesterday? I was saying the Blazers aren't that far off from being competitive in the regular season.
Sure,
playoffs are a different animal because that takes stars.
And not like that, it takes time.
But you take what Joe Cronin said and everything that you've just said right there, and then you compare that to what Anthony Simons said, and this is why he's catching headlines.
Yeah, and Ant yesterday said, we don't want to have another year like this. My 6 years done now going into year 7. I want to have an opportunity to win. And number one, it's going into year 7? How? How did we get here? That's insane to think about. Year 7?
Yeah.
Anthony Simons is going into year 7. He's 24 years old to be 25 this summer. He's hitting his prime. Kind of nuts when you really think about it. Okay. He's been in limbo for probably the majority of his career. As far where Neil Olshey took the organization. It's like, whatever. And then you throw COVID in there in his in-between year or his mid-career year so far. And then the last 2 years. of where things have been. And I don't think I shouldn't say I can't think of a single one because there's a couple. The staggering majority of NBA players from 25 to 29 years old are all saying what Anthony Simons is saying right now. You have your prime years. Now, there's just a few guys where it's like, I don't care, just pay me. Like that exists.
For sure.
That Jordan Poole exists, right? Like that's out there. But most guys want to go perform and win because this is when the physical and the mental line up. And it also is when you earn your biggest contracts. So yeah, you don't want to be stuck on a team that's retooling or rebuilding because people look at you, even if you have a great season, and it's empty stats on a bad team.
Yeah.
We're not paying for that.
Yeah. You get Hassan Whiteside.
Yes. And well, every now and then you get a team that one team will pay you.
Yep.
But it's tough then. So you want to get to a place where you can show you can contribute to a winning team. And I don't think Ant is gone yet, but this is the first part of like, it wouldn't shock me if
value is high. He's entering his prime. He's a very good player. And like this is the thing though, is that for Anthony Simons to truly get what he is talking about out of next season and moving forward here in Portland, it takes a legitimate star in the NBA because he is a number 2 on a very good team, on a winning team. He's a number 2. And there is no number 1 in this draft, especially in year 1 of their career. But year 2 or 3, you have to really squint, even if they win the lottery and you get the number 1 pick. Like you're sitting there, you're like, ugh. And so that doesn't line up with Anthony Simons unless they go and they make a big swing and bring a star in via trade. But what are you giving up to do that? There's not a whole lot that Portland's going to be giving up that they have to give up outside of Anthony Simons to get that in return. Malcolm Brogdon's contract is expiring at next year. So it's essentially a 1-year deal. That's attractive to teams, especially at $22.5 million. You know, maybe a team just says, sure, let's go on a guy like Brogdon, but you're not getting a star in return for Malcolm Brogdon. So what we are hearing Anthony Simons say in where the Blazers are, it's not the same place. It doesn't feel like it's the same place. It feels like they're kind of miles apart because of where the franchise is right now. And so when you say this kind of maybe feel, and you don't want to go that far, having that feeling, just listen to what they're saying. Listen to what Joe Cronin said, and then the quote that you just read from Anthony Simons. And you sit there and you go, yeah, it may feel that way.
And it's 100% normal for that to happen. Not just here, but across the league. If you're on a team that's in a position like this, guys are always like, the only guy who's ever happy in the NBA is the guy the number 1 guy on a title team. Because everybody else always wants more. Everybody else always wants more.
Kevin Durant and Golden State.
Look, I'm telling you, you talk to anybody in the league, anyone, with the exception of the guys that are in, the guys that are still hanging around like year 15, the Udonis Haslams, hanging on the end of the bench, the Taj Gibsons who are just happy and they're doing their thing. If you're still an active player, you're not being given the opportunities that you need to succeed, to show what you are. And that's true across the board. I mean, we saw it with Klay Thompson, the realization that he's not him anymore and what that did to him mentally and emotionally. Yeah, and that is an attitude that it pervades the entire league. And so when guys aren't happy, and here's, like I said, guys aren't happy all the time. Unless you're the number 1 guy on the title-winning team, there's always something to complain about.
Here's a reason, Tex, and this is something along the lines of what I was talking about yesterday. A certain portion of the Blazers fan base has proven they have no patience. They need a new shiny object every 10 days, a new owner, a new coach, a new GM, etc. With actual patience and continued drafting of good players, this team has real upside. Now, the one thing with that, there is a lot of upside, and I talked about this yesterday, in that one thing that Joe Cronin, Mike Schmitz, the brain trust of the organization right now, just last year alone, you can look at it and you could say, from a talent evaluation standpoint, they got a couple really good potential role players, and guys like Toumani Camara, and guys like Ryan Rupert, who was shooting lights out at the end of the year. And you're sitting there, you're like, okay, the development, the talent that they're kind of have that eye for, you can see where they're going, but you only go as far as your star.
And the question is,
and that's the hardest. That's the hardest one. It takes an immense amount of luck to get that player.
yes,
And in order to get that player and surround these role players that they do a really good job of evaluating and developing, you need a lot of luck, and you got to be really bad.
Yeah, and here's the thing. For all of the people who are saying like, oh, their Blazers are doing it wrong, and in the last 2 drafts, they have drafted Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson. Tell me which players they should have drafted that would change their fortunes. Or did they take the 2 best players available to them?
Well, what they should have done was trade that number 3 pick and hang on to Dame, but that's a story for another day.
And again, that door wasn't there because the return.
Because of Dame. Well, and also we forget, like, Dame held the cards there. Like, I mean, you could trade that number 3 pick, and the return wasn't going to be enough to keep Dame happy.
No.
Like, that's the reality of it, because I think the Scoot one, like, that's a big TBD, because we just don't. I mean, we don't know. It's year 1 for all of these guys. And, you know, I saw Kevin O'Connor, he released who he voted for on the all-rookie team, and there's 10 players, and actually he listed 11, and none of them are Scoot Henderson.
And I think the first 3 months of the season were so bad and so toxic that it completely changed how he's discussed.
Well, and we know this from the numbers that bared out. People stopped watching.
Yes.
So
people stopped watching day 1.
There's a lot of people that have an opinion of Scoot Henderson without actually watching how his progression over the year. Yeah. And that's a fair thing to say.
And that's the interesting thing is you look at the way he closed the season, and I don't know if you're sitting there saying that he's the savior of the franchise, but I think it's pretty fair to ask the question is, like, did he show enough for you to have hope going forward?